I didn't argue when the sheriff's deputy handed me the notice. I just walked back into my house, pulled a rolled-up blueprint out of a gun safe, and set it on the kitchen table next to a cold cup of coffee. 48 hours later, 5 brand new homes were sitting in standing water, and the woman who built them was screaming into a Facebook Live camera about an act of war. She wasn't wrong. She just didn't know she'd started it. My name's Nathaniel Cole, 41 years old. 12 years as a hydraulic engineer with the Army Corps of Engineers. 2 deployments doing flood control, where getting it wrong meant people died. I know how water moves and waits. And I know the woman running the Brookstone Ridge Homeowners Association had built her entire subdivision on a floodplain my grandfather spent 40 years training a river to avoid. She thought the grass field behind her cul-de-sac was empty land ripe for the taking. She never asked why there was a concrete spillway at the top of it, half buried in blackberry brambles, quietly doing its job for half a century. She was about to find out, and by the time she did, it'd be too late to stop it. Let me back up. My grandfather, Walter Cole Sr., bought 60 acres outside Comfort, Texas in 1959. In 1971, after floods nearly wiped out a downstream family, he partnered with a soil conservation service engineer to build a small flood control dam and spillway on the back 40 concrete rebar and 40 years of maintenance built to hold back storm surge that used to drown this valley. Grandpa Walter died in 2019. The land went into a family trust managed on paper by a cousin in Phoenix who knew little about Texas water law. A property management outfit paid the taxes. Nobody looked closer. I was overseas for both deployments during exactly the years it mattered. Enter Rebecca Voss, 53, HOA president, married to County Commissioner Gary Voss, driving a Range Rover with a vanity plate that said HOA boss. I came home expecting quiet pasture and a spillway due for inspection. Instead, survey stakes, a construction trailer, 35 foundations poured across the acreage my grandfather spent his life protecting. The site supervisor said the HOA had bought the parcel at a county tax auction 2 years back, title clean. Talk to a mess. Voss, here's the first thing worth remembering. Land can be sold at a tax auction if taxes go unpaid, but not if the taxes were paid under a mistaken parcel number because a clerk filed a subdivision plat that never should have existed. That's not a tax sale. That's a paperwork error weaponized into a land grab. I met Rebecca on her porch 3 days later, tennis whites, wine glass at 10 a.m. She'd tried reaching my family for years, she said. Nobody responded. Abandoned land becomes community land eventually, sweetheart. I asked about the dam. She laughed, called it a crumbling liability, said their engineer wanted it removed next month. That's when I understood 2 things. She had no idea what she was about to do, and I was the only person left alive who did. I drove straight to the county archive. Here's the second thing worth remembering. A flood control structure built with a federal or state soil conservation agency doesn't just belong to the landowner. It carries a maintenance easement that runs with the land permanently, regardless of who claims to own the parcel later. My grandfather's 1971 covenant required the spillway to remain operational, unobstructed, and under qualified engineering control, in perpetuity, for the entire downstream watershed. Rebecca's HOA had built homes inside a floodplain that structure had been suppressing for 50 years, and now she planned to decommission it without a permit or engineering review. A storm was building, 3 inches of rain forecast in 6 days, over a watershed that 35 houses now sat inside. The only thing standing between those houses and the river's memory was a gate only I still knew how to operate. I made my decision before I even started the truck. That night, in the farmhouse attic, I found a 1938 mineral and water rights deed, my great-grandfather's granting our family senior rights to the entire creek feeding the valley, older than the courthouse, older than anything Rebecca's HOA could produce. They hadn't just built on land they didn't own. They'd built on top of water they never had the right to touch. I called a lawyer, Priya Anand, and read her the covenant language. She went quiet, then said, "Say that again, slower." Rebecca didn't wait. 2 days later, a truck from Voss Construction, her husband's company, showed up at the spillway with a mini excavator. I got there first, papers in hand, and told the foreman that touching that structure wasn't a zoning violation. It was destroying a flood control structure, servicing an entire watershed. Federal charges. The excavator went back on the trailer without a word. Rebecca's response arrived by certified mail, a cease, and desist accusing me of trespassing, plus a sheriff's report describing me as a disturbed combat veteran engaging in threatening behavior. Then the pressure campaign started: code enforcement, the fire marshal, animal control over cattle, reported by someone who'd never seen a cow. Every visit, no violation. Every visit, a full day lost. I recognized the pattern from occupied territory. Bury the target in small administrative pressure until they fold. So I stopped playing defense and called an old deployment friend now in state environmental compliance, laying out the covenant, the water rights, and the unpermitted decommission attempt. Within a week, the state opened an inquiry into whether Brookstone Ridge's floodplain permit had disclosed the flood control easement. It hadn't. That's potential fraud on 2 fronts. Rebecca counterattacked with a staged community safety forum for a news crew, dabbing at dry eyes about a threatening veteran. Then her husband used his commissioner's office to request a wellness check on me through Veterans Services, while Rebecca watched from her Range Rover at the end of my driveway. The social worker left 20 minutes later, embarrassed. That night, I found pry marks on the spillway's maintenance hatch. I filed a report and set trail cameras. 3 nights later, they caught 2 men jamming the primary release valve with expanding construction foam, the kind that, under real pressure, would make the gate fail catastrophically instead of opening in a controlled release. With the storm 4 days out and 35 houses downstream, this had stopped being a property dispute. The moment someone decided sabotage was an acceptable answer to losing an argument. Construction foam sets like concrete inside precision hydraulic machinery built to move under controlled pressure. A gate failure under real storm load doesn't fail a little. It fails all at once, without warning, exactly when the most water is behind it. I've seen an uncontrolled release overseas. I wasn't about to let it happen to a subdivision that had no idea what was sitting above their houses. State investigator Frank Delgado called it immediately attempted destruction of a regulated flood control structure. Federal. 2 Voss Construction employees were arrested that afternoon and gave up, who hired them within 6 hours. Rebecca's name came up first, her husband's right behind it. The storm was still coming, now forecasting 3.5 inches over 18 hours. I notified Delgado and the fire department, posted bilingual warnings at every access point, 48 hours out, per my grandfather's operating manual. At 6 the next morning, with investigators behind the safety tape, I opened the gate to 20% capacity. The water didn't crash. It moved patient and certain, unbothered by paperwork. Within 4 hours, the creek bed Rebecca's engineers had filled and built over was running again, cutting gently through 3 backyards built inside its historic channel. No homes were destroyed. No one was hurt. But by 9 a.m., 3 crawl spaces had standing water, and the subdivision's showcase retention pond had merged with a creek that remembered exactly where it belonged. Rebecca arrived screaming on live stream about domestic terrorism. Delgado stepped into frame calm, a permitted, notified, supervised release, below rated capacity, on a schedule her own crew had tried to sabotage the week before. The hearing, 3 weeks later, packed the courthouse. Rebecca's team led with property damage and a veteran weaponizing his training. Priya needed 11 minutes, the covenant into evidence, the engineering report confirming a safe release, Delgado testifying that successful sabotage would have destroyed every home downstream, and the county clerk confirming Rebecca had personally signed a disclosure omitting the flood easement. The judge didn't take long. Restraining order denied. Covenant upheld as binding on the land regardless of ownership. The sabotage case moved forward, both contractors cooperating against Rebecca and her husband. 6 months later, Gary Voss resigned rather than face an ethics hearing. Rebecca pled guilty to conspiracy, got 18 months mostly suspended, and a permanent ban from any HOA board in the state. The construction company lost its license and paid restitution. 19 of the 35 families took buyouts and left. The rest stayed, formed a new board with actual engineers, and rezoned the lowest lots as protected green space. I didn't get my grandfather's whole 60 acres back. The county brokered a settlement. I keep the dam, the spillway, and a permanent easement across the restored creek bed. The rest stays developed, but built with the water in mind instead of in denial of it. Not total victory? Something better, the valley got its memory back. The inquiry prompted a review of 2 other developments Rebecca had approved, both tied to Voss construction, neither disclosing known flood risk. Those cases are still working through the county. I still check the gauge most mornings, coffee in hand, watching the creek run where it's supposed to. Some mornings, one of the new board members walks down to check it with me. The water remembers. It always does.